Why does Valve's newest hero still kinda suck? Even though Muerta is the first new position 1 carry since Monkey King in 2016, this character remains relatively unpopular. So why does she still suck for most players? And is there a way to make her better? For starters, to be honest, Muerta is a flawed hero, but what makes her very difficult to succeed with is that she doesn't really fit in this meta. Earlier this year, Valve released a brand new Dota 2 hero, Muerta, in patch 7.32e titled The Dead Reckoning. She was described as a carry-ranged nuker and disabler, and she was a rare intelligence-based hero with a fear component to one of her core abilities. Her abilities seem good on paper. Deadshot is a decent nuke damage with a skill component where you can bounce the spell off trees to fear opponents in unique directions. The calling is a huge AoE that slows enemies for 30%, while the outer edges silence them and deal damage, causing a dilemma for opponents trapped within. Gunslinger is a classic carry passive ability where up to 50% of her attacks have a chance to hit a second target. And finally, her ultimate, Pierce the Veil, transforms her to become immune to physical attacks, and all her physical attack damage turns magical, going right through enemies' armor. She also gains 150 extra attack damage on top of whatever she built with items. At her release, she had a 56% pick rate, but a lowly 43% win rate at the Immortal bracket. Since that time, she has had a few adjustments, but nothing too massive. Prior to 7.33, one of the reasons she was not that popularly successful was because Black King Bar previously used to block all magic damage output. That meant the amount she invests the most in her fight with Pierce the Veil was the time she couldn't compete against other cores with one core item. With the release of New Frontiers patch, Black King Bar is obviously much less effective against Muerta, only blocking 50% magic damage, but there are still many items that counter her. So what's Muerta's deal? Why isn't she as popular as other potential carries? To be honest, there are a lot of inherent problems with the hero, as well as the meta environment that makes her just a difficult pick. First off, the current rhythm of the game is contradictory to her playstyle, as she is more of the classic, I need to AFK farm to be a strong hero late game. Since 7.33 and even previous patches, the meta has always incentivized early game fighting and aggression, giving emphasis on mid-game carries that can team fight and take objectives quickly. These factors detract her from focusing on her farm without an appropriate draft to match without her, a rarity in pubs. That said, because of her generous damage from her ultimate, she can take fights, though teams know to target and disable her regularly to run her ultimate down, specifically during the laning stage. Like most ranged carries, she is a glass cannon and can't keep up with popular offlaners, especially those with mobility. If you've ever played Muerta, you already know her Deadshot costs an arm and a leg in terms of mana, so she can't use that to harass or repel enemies. With a limited mana pool, she must conserve her abilities only to punish opponents if they get too close to the wave, where she can use Deadshot to push them towards her the calling AoE, and hopefully pick them off with her support. All this means is that her early game is rough in a patch where your laning stage counts for everything. Her low mobility, high mana cost abilities, and high risk of death puts her in a finicky position from the start of every game. Once laning is complete, Muerta usually builds Maelstrom to farm the stacked jungle camps with Gunslinger maxed second. The two combined accelerates her farm quickly, though Maelstrom has an internal cooldown so it cannot occur twice on two separate targets simultaneously. Items like Hurricane Pike, Black King Bar, Mjolnir, and Silver Edge are popular purchases for her because they all contribute to her maximizing her Pierce the Veil, and it's a small window duration for damage output. Her biggest issues can be broken down into 4 areas that codepend on one another. Number 1. Low mobility. Her movement is the equivalent of Huskar, Nature's Prophet, Alchemist, and more. All these heroes that have positioning abilities, whereas Muerta has none. Her low mobility makes her an easy target to punish when caught out. Number 2. Average attack speed. Pierce the Veil has a very limited window, highlighting high damage and desiring good attack speed to complement that. All her key items contribute to it effectively and plays into our first point. Mobility means you could be at the right place at the right time when you pop Pierce the Veil. 3. Average attack range. She has lower range than Medusa, Silencer, and Invoker. Muerta is reliant on being near foes so she can maximize the most of her Pierce the Veil. And finally, number 4. Unreliable debuffs. While the calling has a generous 30% slow at level 1, Muerta relies on a proper draft to initiate and hold down enemies. However, it's not all bad for Muerta. Recent patches have introduced an Ag Shard and Scepter, which seek to fill gaps in her playstyle in the mid-game. Her Shard incentivizes early fights for the hero, giving her value with each successful gank leading up to the late game. Her Scepter is a solid disable against enemies who may be able to kite past her ultimate. Furthermore, while I spend a good amount of time talking about her flaws, her base attack time is among the best, and late game, no amount of items will save foes against her unrivaled damage, as it goes right through armor, and if she has a silver edge, also crits on top. We're also seeing an uptick in Mask of Madness purchases to try and give her movement and attack speed to make her more viable mid-game. Should you somehow reach the late game with all your immediate items, there are still many counters to Muerta from items to heroes. While Black King Bar not only blocks 50% of her magic damage, Blade Mail is currently a popular item in this meta and for heroes that directly punish her. We're talking about those in-your-face heroes like Dawnbreaker, Legion Commander, and Primal Beast, as well as many more. But even beyond that, what is challenging for Muerta is that her damage output can be so easily challenged by supporting core items like Glimmer Cape, Force Staff, and Halberd. Simply put, Muerta doesn't really follow the typical glass cannon archetype, as well as requiring a ton of items in matches where the hero just doesn't frankly get the space, draft, or time to farm it in typical public games. Is there hope for Muerta? I believe yes, and we started to see her picked more in pro games like Dream League, where we saw Shopify, Liquid, and Gaming Gladiators pick her. In particular, for Shopify's match, we can see their draft was focused around holding enemies down for Muerta to destroy, as well as pushing the match to its later stages to give her maximum time for her core items. I'm not saying Muerta is unplayable. She has a positive win rate at the highest level of public matches. However, I do believe she sucks to play for the majority of players, and that she requires a lot of coordination from her team to finally come online. Either Muerta wins with her ultimate or she loses the game. With so many items needed for her to ensure she can perform during her ultimate, it's very awkward to have that fall flat, especially if the team relies on the damage. Muerta is essentially a bizarro Drow Ranger or Sniper. If those heroes are about keeping maximum distance from their targets and kiting them, Muerta is the opposite. She wants to be on top of enemies as they try to separate themselves. A good comparison to Muerta is Medusa, where despite being ranged, she pops her Stone Gaze, and players want to capitalize on it by running at enemies. Muerta is similar but more. She wants to already be in her opponent's face when she pops her ultimate, hence the need for Silver Edge for positioning, on top of the attack speed and critical damage that comes with that item. She is a strong old school hero in a new school meta. Who knows how she will be altered in upcoming matches, or if the game itself needs to align more towards her playstyle and duration of matches. Maybe she was never meant to be a carry, as we are starting to see signs of her being a position 4 support combined with Atos, The Calling, and Deadshot. For Valve, who have been trying to push for more carries, this may yet be another hero that gets relegated to a support hero, or worse, just outright rarely picked.